If you're so smart, then why are you still pouring coffee? The whole diner paused. Forks froze midair. The man in the $1,000 suit didn't raise his voice, but every word landed like a slap. Emily didn't flinch, but her grip on the coffee pot tightened just slightly. Emily Thompson didn't flinch. She just looked at him steady. Her hand brushed the edge of the coffee pot, still warm. She'd heard worse, but this one stung, not because it was cruel, but because it sounded familiar. A memory stirred her father's voice, soft but firm. Just because the world can't see your worth doesn't mean it's not there. M. She turned, picked up the stack of papers he'd tossed aside like garbage. A contract thick with traps he didn't even see. He thought she was just a waitress, but tonight, in this forgotten corner of the city, she was about to save his empire, and he'd never forget her name. David Whitmore hated losing control. At 43, he had built Whitmore Systems into a global tech empire, the kind with glass towers, private jets, and boardrooms that smelled like leather and fear. His face was on magazine covers. His words moved markets. And yet, tonight, none of that seemed to matter. A $2 billion merger with Synergy Solutions was slipping through his fingers. 2 months of negotiations, hundreds of hours with lawyers, and still the contract sat like a loaded trap on his desk. Terms that twisted back on themselves. Loopholes disguised as progress. Clauses so vague even his Ivy League team couldn't decipher them. His assistant suggested a break. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere low profile. And that's how David, still in his tailored charcoal suit, found himself stepping into Rosie's diner at 11:23 p.m. The place hadn't changed in decades. Chipped Formica tables, neon signs buzzing faintly in the window. The jukebox wheezed out a Motown classic from a corner. A trucker with tired eyes sipped black coffee near the entrance. 2 nurses in scrubs shared fries at the counter. No one looked up when David walked in. He slid into the last booth by the window. Droplets of rain patterned the glass beside him. He dropped the contract onto the table with a soft thud, its pages already marked with red ink and frustration. He didn't come here to eat. He came to think. But thinking was hard when every word on that paper screamed betrayal. Fiduciary clause, indemnification, conditional equity release. He muttered under his breath, pen tapping like a warning bell. That's when she appeared. Late night or long one, the voice was soft but clear. Calm, not cheerful. David didn't look up. Both, he grumbled. She placed a glass of water in front of him, slid a menu under the corner of the contract, and stood still for a moment, just long enough to be noticed, not long enough to annoy. From the corner of his eye, he saw sneakers, jeans, and a plain gray apron. Her hair was tied back in a loose knot. No makeup, no badge, no smile, but her eyes, green steady, lingered on the paper. Not him. "Looks like that contract's trying to eat you alive," she said quietly. That made him look up. Just a little. What you read legalese now, thought this place sold pancakes, not law degrees. She didn't react, didn't step back, just tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and shrugged. Sometimes, saying it out loud helps. She motioned to the papers. "Want to try?" He let out a breath somewhere between a laugh and a scoff. "You want me to explain a $2 billion merger to a waitress?" Her tone didn't change. "Only if you want to win it." That caught him. For a second, he just stared. Then he slid the contract across the table like a dare. "If you're so smart, then translate it." He expected hesitation. Embarrassment. A nervous laugh, a polite retreat. But she didn't move. She picked up the top page gently as if it mattered, and then she sat down. Her notepad came from her apron pocket. Yellowed, creased at the corners. Her handwriting was neat, small, like someone used to writing in margins. David leaned back, arms crossed, waiting to be amused. But something about the way she furrowed her brow wasn't funny. The diner buzzed around them. A plate clinked, a bell rang. The jukebox wheezed into a new tune. But in that booth, the world slowed. She spoke without rushing. This indemnification clause, It's about blame. If Synergy's tech fails after the merger, they want you to cover the fallout. Imagine buying a car and the engine blows the next day. They're saying it's your fault for driving. David blinked. That was accurate. She flipped the page. This escrow line. It's like putting $500 million in a piggy bank no one can touch. They say it's for safety, but it locks you up. You should ask for a phase release. He sat up straighter. Who are you? She didn't answer right away, just kept reading. Somewhere outside, the rain picked up trailing long lines down the window. The city kept humming, unaware that a waitress in a gray apron had just turned the tables inside a booth at Rosie's diner. And, for the first time that night, David listened. She didn't rush. She never did. Emily flipped another page of the contract, her pen tapping softly against the side of her notepad. Her eyes moved line by line the same way they did when she counted tips after a long shift or checked her mother's prescriptions late at night, careful, exact, unafraid. David was no longer smirking. His fingers rested on the table still as stone. She spoke again, calm and sure. There's a clause on page 19. It says if your company's stock dips by even 3% before the merger closes, Synergy can back out penalty-free. She looked up, met his eyes. That's not standard, is it? David didn't answer immediately. His lawyers hadn't caught that. Or they had, and brushed past it assuming the probability was low. But now, framed in her voice, it sounded like a loaded gun pressed to his side. His throat tightened. Where did you learn to read contracts like this? Emily shrugged lightly. I didn't. I just like patterns. I look for what doesn't belong. She set the papers down. Not with arrogance. With care. Like someone placing something back where it should be. David studied her now not as a waitress but as a mind. And behind that mind he started to see a life. She didn't offer her story, but something in the stillness between them invited a question. You ever think of doing something else? He asked. She gave a soft chuckle. I used to. I was in school for computer science. Got through most of it. He tilted his head. What happened? Emily's hands moved to her lap. She didn't fidget, but her voice softened. My mom got sick. Couldn't work anymore. My little brother was getting into trouble, wrong crowd. Someone had to keep the lights on. This job pays just enough to do that. David nodded slowly. He understood responsibility. But not like this. And the contract, he asked. How are you this good at reading it? She tapped the side of her temple. I read, I listen. People think waitresses don't hear anything, but we hear everything. Breakups, business deals. People whisper when they think no one's paying attention. Then, almost shyly, she added, and I have a thing for puzzles. Contracts are just puzzles with stakes. David's gaze dropped to her notepad. Every section she'd explained was broken down in tiny, perfect lines with analogies beside each term like teaching herself law in her off hours. You still code? She nodded slightly, then pulled out her phone. It's rough. Midnight project. She tapped, turned the screen. Clean interface, real-time sync, encrypted toggles. David leaned in. What he saw made him sit up. A clean, intuitive interface. Smooth transitions, real-time syncing, encrypted communication toggles. Even the name ConnectFear was simple but strong, the kind of product his own R&D team had been circling for months without landing. His voice came out lower now. You built this. Her smile was faint, almost apologetic. At night, after work, no investors, just me and an old laptop. David stared at the screen. For years, he'd told himself he could spot talent in any room. But this woman had been pouring coffee 3 blocks from his headquarters for 3 years, and he'd never known her name. Then he asked the question again, quiet this time. Who are you? Really? Emily's eyes met his. Steady, tired, but not dimmed. I'm someone who's good at figuring things out, she said. Then after a beat, You done mocking me yet? He didn't speak, but his silence said everything. Outside, the rain softened to a drizzle. A semi-truck rumbled past the window, its headlights streaking the walls with gold for a brief moment. In that flicker something changed. Not in her, in him. And in the back of Emily's mind, her father's voice returned gentle, like a thread tying past to present. Some people won't see you until you fix something they care about. That doesn't mean you weren't there all along. The diner had emptied out by now. Plates were cleared. Chairs turned upside down on tables. Only the hum of the jukebox and the whisper of tires on wet pavement remained. David sat there unmoving, one elbow resting on the edge of the table, the other hand holding Emily's phone still open to the app. He didn't know what shocked him more, the clean code or the clarity of her mind. "This is impressive," he said at last. "Quiet, not performative." Emily gave a small nod. "Thanks." No smile, no proud tilt of the head, just thanks. David leaned back. His mind was spinning now, not with stress, but with recalibration. Everything about her defied what he'd been taught to value. He glanced up at her. "What stops you from pitching this?" She looked down at her notepad, then out the window. "You ever walk into a room and feel like you don't belong even before you speak?" She didn't wait for him to answer. "I've been that girl too many times. No degree, no title, no polished LinkedIn. People listen until they learn I pour coffee for a living. Then they stop." Her voice wasn't bitter. It was lived in, like the wear on a handle that's been turned 1,000 times. David exhaled through his nose. Guilt began to seep in, quiet but sharp. He was one of those people. A few hours ago he called her sweetheart. Emily didn't bring it up. That somehow made it worse. "Do you want to build this?" he asked carefully. She met his gaze. "Of course I do. So what's stopping you?" She folded the notepad shut and tucked it into her apron. Her fingers hesitated just slightly before she answered. "Fear, time, reality. I work double shifts. Change of fee bags at 6 a.m. Wipe counters at 11 p.m. I drive my brother in a borrowed car with no AC and pray it doesn't stall at red lights." She paused. "Bills pile up faster than I can count tips." David looked away, jaw tight. He had built companies on hustle, but hers was the kind that never got noticed. The kind that happened in silence. He picked up her phone again. Studied the code architecture. Lightweight, efficient. The logic tree mapped clean. "Your mind is wasted here," he murmured. Emily didn't flinch. "It's not wasted. It's waiting." A pause. Then, almost as if she were remembering something, she said, "My dad used to tell me, just because the world can't see your worth doesn't mean it's not there." David closed his eyes for half a second. He could picture her younger, probably brilliant, probably invisible, turning down internships, dropping out of classes, trading textbooks for pill bottles and grocery lists. Not because she lacked drive, because she had too much love. And somewhere in the shadows of his own success, David felt something stir, something unfamiliar. Respect. Not the corporate kind. Not the kind you put on resumes or toast at banquets. The kind that humbles you. "I want to help," he said finally. Emily raised an eyebrow. "Help how you need resources. Time. A team. I can give you all that. Fund this. Develop it under my company's umbrella. You'll be the lead." She didn't react right away. Just tilted her head, studying him like she was measuring whether his words had roots. "You don't even know me." David nodded slowly. "That's true." Then quietly, "But I know talent, and I know what it feels like to be stuck behind noise that has nothing to do with your ability." Emily looked down. Her fingers brushed a coffee stain on the table that had been there since before either of them walked in. "I don't want a handout," she said. "I'm not offering one," he replied. "I'm offering a partnership." The silence stretched. Then she untied her apron and folded it once, then again. "I'll think about it," she said. He nodded. She paused before walking away, then added, "But I keep my job here until I see the app launch, until it's real. Not a promise, not a maybe." David smiled almost involuntarily. "Deal." She disappeared into the back. A moment later, the lights over the counter dimmed and the jukebox clicked off. He sat in the booth a moment longer, her notepad still open before him. On the top of the last page was a scribbled line of code, and beneath it barely legible 3 handwritten words. "It's worth trying." He stared at the words for a long time, then picked up his phone and called his team. The next day, everything would begin again, but this time with a different voice in the room. 3 days passed. David didn't sleep much, not from stress, but from something rarer, more electric clarity. He'd brought Emily's notes back to his legal team, quietly, without naming her. Just said he wanted fresh eyes on the deal. They found what she found. Then found more. Clause 17, 4.4.3. The one she flagged about the stock dip wasn't just unusual. It was intentional. A quiet back door. If the merger went public and stirred investor worry, Whitmore Systems would be left vulnerable and Synergy could walk away with leverage. No penalty, no accountability. Worse, the escrow clause. The indemnification terms they'd all been subtly angled to make Whitmore absorb almost all risk while appearing balanced on the surface. "How the hell did she catch this?" his general counsel muttered. David didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the window of his office, hands in his pockets, watching the city blur beneath a gray sky. It had rained that morning. The same soft drizzle from the night at Rosie's. He could still hear her voice. "It's not wasted. It's waiting." So he waited too until the board meeting. It was held in the executive wing. Long glass table, leather chairs, suits with rehearsed smiles. The final review of the Synergy merger. David stood at the head, silent, letting the room settle. Then he placed a single notepad on the table, yellowed, folded at the corners, and opened it. "Page 19, he said. "Clause 17. Let's talk about it." The room fell quiet. Over the next 30 minutes, he walked them through every flaw Emily had identified. In plain English, he even used her analogies. The piggy bank, the broken car. The team grew restless. "This isn't in the summary report," one VP said. "I know," David replied. "That's the problem." Then he paused, stepped back from the table. "I've decided we're countering the deal. Rolling back escrow by 30%, inserting a clause that makes the risk symmetrical, and striking the stock dip escape hatch altogether." A murmur. "You really think they'll agree to that?" someone challenged. "I think David said they'll say no if they think we're desperate. But we're not. We're ready." He held up the phone in his hand. "Because we've got something better in the pipeline." He didn't say Emily. Not yet. But her work, the bones of Connect Fear, was now the trap flipped back toward Synergy, a new card on the table. And it worked. That evening, Synergy blinked. They didn't walk, but they compromised. Escrow reduced. Risk rebalanced. The stock clause removed entirely. The deal closed 3 days later, favorably. David walked out of the boardroom not with a victory lap, but with a new urgency, a different destination. He returned to Rosie's on a Thursday evening. The air outside was warmer now. Spring was loosening winter's grip. Inside, Emily was wiping down the counter. Same gray apron, same gentle knot in her hair. But when she looked up and saw him, there was no surprise, only quiet recognition. "I figured I'd see you again," she said. David approached the booth they'd shared. Set down a folder, no contracts, no scripts, just one page, a formal offer, full funding, her app, her team, her name on every line. She didn't pick it up, just stared at him. Why, she asked. He didn't hesitate. "Because you saved me." Then softer. "Not just the deal. You saved me from believing that only people who talk like me, dress like me, look like me deserve to be heard." Emily looked down at the table. The same corner still bore the faded coffee stain. She reached into her apron and pulled out her notepad. It was thinner now, fewer pages, more used. She placed it beside the offer. "I'm not going to be easy to work with," she said. David smiled. "I'm counting on that. And I'm keeping this job," she added, "until it launches, until I know it's real." He nodded. "It already is." She paused, then opened the notepad. Tucked inside the last page a photo. Faded. A man with soft eyes holding a young girl at a cluttered kitchen table pointing to a math worksheet. "My dad," she said simply. "He used to tell me, 'Fix what you can reach. The rest will follow.'" David looked at the photo, then at her. "You've already fixed more than you know," and for the first time since they met, she smiled. Not small, not guarded, full. The kind of smile that doesn't need proof anymore. 6 weeks later, the tech world stirred. Whitmore Systems announced a new initiative, Project Horizon, a groundbreaking communication platform led by an unexpected name. Not a VP, not a consultant, a developer. New, Emily Thompson. The announcement sent ripples through the press. A few blogs picked up the story. Waitress turned tech lead most dismissed it as PR fluff, a feel-good gimmick. But inside the headquarters, she wasn't a token. She was building the core. Emily arrived every morning at 6:30 a.m., still in jeans and sneakers, hair tied back. She worked quietly, cleanly, line by line, sprint by sprint. David gave her a team, but she kept the same yellow notepad, still wrote with the same pen. She never asked for attention, never sought the spotlight, but talent like light finds its way through the cracks. And that made people uncomfortable, especially Mason Vance, Senior Director of Engineering. At the Thursday demo review, Mason leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, voice oily. "So, you're saying this was all coded after diner shifts?" He chuckled. "Well, that explains the spaghetti structure." The room went still. Emily didn't blink. She clicked her trackpad, pulled up the logic map, and walked through every branch. Every decision. Her voice stayed low but firm. "If you have a cleaner solution, I'm listening." Mason blinked. She continued, "If not, I'd prefer we focus on the function." David was at the back of the room, arms folded, watching, not intervening, just witnessing. Because in that moment, Emily didn't need defending. She'd outgrown the booth. The next day, the board asked for a presentation. Big conference room. Glass walls, city skyline yawning beyond. David walked in first. Emily followed, carrying her notepad instead of a laptop. Some of the older members raised brows. A few leaned in curious. She didn't give them a sales pitch. She told them a story. "Connect Fear isn't just software," she said. "It's built for people like me, who work double shifts, who don't have time to read manuals, who need connection that doesn't fail at 2 a.m. when your mom's breathing goes shallow and the doctor's on hold." Silence. Heavy. Then she opened a demo. One click. Live sync across devices. Emergency auto routing. Message priority flags. Built-in interpreter toggles. Simple. Fast. Grounded. Mason tried again. "We've seen better UI from funded teams." But Emily cut in. "Calm, steady, you're right. They have more polish. But they weren't built at midnight between caring for a sick parent and driving a brother to rehab. This was." Then she closed the demo. "And it works." One of the board members leaned back, whispered to another, "She's the real deal." David stepped forward. "Emily didn't ask for this spotlight. She earned it. She didn't sell herself because she's been told too many times she's not worth buying." He paused. Let his words land. "But without her, this company would have signed a deal that gutted us. Without her, Connect Fear wouldn't exist." He looked at Emily, then back at the room. "And if you can't see that, maybe you're the ones who don't belong at this table." Silence again. Then applause, quiet at first, then solid. One by one, the room shifted. Respect wasn't granted. It was claimed. That night, David found Emily on the rooftop terrace. She stood alone, hands in her pockets, looking out at the lights. "They clapped," she said, almost amused. "I wasn't expecting that." "They saw what I saw," he replied. She didn't look at him, just smiled faintly. "It's strange," she said. "Same mind, same hands. But in a different building, people call it genius instead of luck." David stepped beside her. "You were always the same. The world's just catching up. A pause. Then, almost a whisper. My dad would have liked today. David nodded. He would have been proud. She looked down, voice softer. He used to say, you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. Just speak when it matters. She hadn't needed to yell or prove. She'd simply shown up and been ready. The city below pulsed quietly. Somewhere in that rhythm a shift had happened, not just in Emily's life, but in the way someone like her was seen and maybe believed. Six months later, Connect Fear launched. No fanfare, no fireworks, just a quiet press release and a small upload at 300 a.m., the same hour Emily used to write code in a dim kitchen while the rest of the world slept. But within 2 weeks, the numbers spoke. Users signed up in waves. Small businesses, emergency responders, schools in underfunded districts, a support center for veterans. The platform worked. It was fast, intuitive, and kind in the way it didn't overwhelm. No pop-ups, no jargon, just communication clean and human. The tech world noticed. Then the investors. Then the journalists. Headlines began to appear. Built by a Waitress, now used by millions. The app that listens because its creator knows what it means to not be heard. Emily, however, didn't change much. She still wore sneakers, still tied her hair in a loose knot, still kept the same notepad, now nearly filled its corners, even more worn. But one morning she didn't clock in at Rosie's. The apron stayed folded at home, placed beside a photo of her dad, the one at the kitchen table, pointing to a math problem with a coffee mug beside him. She kept it near her desk now, beside the company badge that read Emily Thompson, Director of Systems Design. The reform wasn't loud, but it was real. David changed the hiring process at Whitmore Systems. Quietly, then publicly. No more resumes as gatekeepers. They opened apprenticeships for community colleges, launched a scouting program in rural towns, built a pipeline for caregivers and veterans, people with skills, but no spotlight. He gave Emily the lead. She chose the name, the Quiet Talent Project. At the kickoff meeting, she stood before a small group, just 12 applicants. One was a trucker who used to write scripts in notebooks during breaks. One was a single mom who coded while her toddler napped. One was a retired nurse who built spreadsheets to track her husband's meds. Emily looked at them steady. I don't care where you've worked, she said. I care what you've built and what you're willing to try. A young man in the back raised his hand. He had rough hands, ink stains on his sleeves. You really believe someone like me can belong here? Emily smiled. Soft, full. The kind that carries 100 no's and still says yes. I don't believe it, she said. I know it. Outside the company, Emily set up a small scholarship. Quiet, almost invisible online. It wasn't named after her. It was called the Still Waters Fund. For anyone who had to pause school to take care of someone else. For anyone told they were too late, too old, too small to make something of their own. She never asked for donations. But they came anyway. David was the first. One evening, they returned to Rosie's. Not as boss and employee, not even as partners. Just two people who had once sat in a booth on a rainy night and changed each other's lives without realizing it. The place looked the same. Same floors, same flickering sign, same booth by the window. But this time, Emily wasn't carrying a coffee pot. She was carrying a wrapped box. She placed it on the table, slid it across to David. Open it. Inside was a framed photo, a page torn from her old notepad, one of the early sketches for Connect Fear. Annotated. Smudged with grease. Coffee ring in the corner. At the bottom, her handwriting. It's worth trying. David traced the words with his eyes. You kept it. I almost threw it out once she said. I thought, maybe no one would ever take it seriously. And now he asked. She looked around the diner, the sounds, the smells, the same worn counter, but everything different. Now I know, she said softly, what starts quiet can still go far. The jukebox played something old. Smokey Robinson, maybe Sam Cooke. They didn't speak for a while, just sat. 2 cups of black coffee between them. Rain tapping on the window again like it had that very first night. Somewhere in the distance, the world kept turning. But inside this booth, everything had already changed. A year had passed. Not much had changed at Rosie's Diner. The sign still flickered on cold nights. The booths still creaked when you leaned in too far. The jukebox still played old songs that no one remembered requesting. But on one particular evening, it wasn't the smell of coffee or fried onions that filled the air. It was something softer, quieter, like memory. Emily stood near the window, no apron, no notepad in hand. Just herself. ConnectFear had just released its 5th update. The press wanted a conference. Tech bloggers wanted interviews. She said no to all of it. Instead, she asked to come back here, to the place it began, with the people who mattered. Her mother sat in the front row, bundled in a scarf Emily had knitted during hospital nights. Her brother stood near the back, taller, now steadier. There were a few team members, some local students, a couple of former customers who used to tip her in coins and kind words. David arrived late quietly holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one without a word. She nodded in thanks. When Emily spoke, she didn't stand on a stage. She stood by the same booth where she'd once been mocked. I used to think she said that the only way to be seen was to be loud, or polished, or perfect. She looked down, then up again. But my dad used to tell me you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. Just speak when it matters. A pause settled over the room. I didn't build ConnectFear to prove anything. I built it because I knew what it felt like to need something simple, something that works when everything else doesn't. Her voice didn't waver. It didn't need to. I didn't save the world. I just fixed what I could reach. Later that night, after the chairs were folded and the lights dimmed, Emily sat at the same table, fingers tracing the edge of the wood. David sat across from her, not as a CEO, not even as a partner. Just someone who had once failed to see her. "You remember the first thing you said to me?" she asked, half smiling. David winced. "Unfortunately, yes." She shook her head gently. "I don't." He blinked. "You don't?" "No," she said. "I forgot the insult, but I remember the first moment someone saw past my apron. Outside, the city moved on fast and loud. But here in this booth, the world was still, and sometimes still is exactly what we need. If this story touched you, share it. Not for the numbers, but for the ones who are still waiting to be seen.